There's always been something deeply unsettling about the night Stringbean Akeman lost his life, not only because of the brutal violence involved, but because of how avoidable it all seemed in hindsight. For decades, the story lingered in whispers across Tennessee and the country music world, passed down like a cautionary tale that no one wanted to revisit too closely. Stringbean was not a man known for controversy or excess. He was known for kindness, simplicity, and routine. That is what made the tragedy hit so hard. His death did not come from a life of danger or risky choices, but from habits built during hard times. Habits meant to protect, not expose. People wondered how such a beloved figure could become the target of such cruelty. Over time, theories filled the silence. Some believed the crime was random, others thought it was inevitable. But when the full story is examined carefully, when overlooked details are placed in order, the truth becomes painfully clear. The danger did not come suddenly. It built quietly, slowly, fed by rumors, predictability, and a misplaced sense of safety. What happened inside that small cabin on Baker Road was not just a crime. It was a collision of fear, poverty-born habits, and human greed. And once the pieces are put together, the mystery is no longer confusing, just heartbreaking. This was not a story that ended with justice neatly wrapped. It ended with loss, regret, and lessons learned too late. David Akeman was born on June 17, 1915, in Annville, Kentucky, a place where life was shaped by labor, family, and survival. His early years were defined by simplicity and struggle, long before fame ever entered his world. His father, James Akeman, played the banjo at local dances, and music became part of David's life almost as naturally as breathing. At just 12 years old, David traded a prize bantam chicken for his first banjo, a decision that quietly changed his future. Even then, it was clear that music offered him something more than entertainment. It offered purpose. But talent alone could not protect him from the reality of the Great Depression. As the economy collapsed, David was forced out of school and into work, joining the Civilian Conservation Corps. He spent his young adulthood building roads and planting trees across Tennessee, learning lessons that stayed with him forever. He learned that nothing was guaranteed, that money could disappear overnight, and that institutions could fail. These experiences shaped not only how he lived, but how he thought. In the 1930s and early 1940s, he entered talent contests and played barn dances wherever he could. It was during one of these contests that a judge forgot his last name and called him Stringbean because of his tall, thin frame. The nickname followed him everywhere, eventually replacing his given name entirely. What began as a joke became an identity, one that audiences would grow to love. But behind the humor and music was a man deeply marked by hardship, always preparing for the possibility that stability could vanish again. By the mid-1940s, Stringbean's career had begun to rise. He joined Bill Monroe's Bluegrass Boys as their first banjo player, helping shape the early sound of bluegrass music. Though his time with the group ended when Earl Scruggs took over in 1945, Stringbean continued to build his own path. Over the next 2 decades, he developed comedy duos, recorded music, and eventually became a beloved cast member of Hee Haw in 1969. Millions of Americans welcomed him into their homes every week through television. He was funny, warm, and instantly recognizable, with his long frame, short pants, and gentle humor. Yet fame never changed how he lived. While other stars bought large homes and luxury cars, Stringbean and his wife Estelle chose a small cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. They lived quietly, far from the spotlight. Stringbean distrusted banks, avoided modern conveniences, and preferred to keep his life predictable. These choices were not stubbornness. They were survival habits formed during the Depression. To him, cash was safety. Banks were uncertainty. Change was risk. This mindset would later become one of the most tragic elements of his story. While the world saw a successful entertainer, behind the scenes lived a man still guarding himself against poverty, still preparing for loss that never came, until something far worse did. Stringbean married Estelle Stanfield in 1945, and together they formed a partnership rooted in loyalty, routine, and deep understanding. Estelle, born in 1914, shared many of the same Depression-era instincts as her husband. She was gentle, private, and content with simple life. The couple never had children, but their bond was strong and unwavering. Friends often said that where one was seen, the other was never far away. Estelle supported Stringbean quietly, organizing his notes backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, managing small details, and offering stability in a world that could easily overwhelm. Their cabin on Baker Road reflected who they were: modest, familiar, and unguarded. There were no alarms, no locked gates, no fences separating them from the land around them. For decades, this felt natural and safe. But another detail of their life carried hidden danger. Because Stringbean distrusted banks, he kept large amounts of cash inside the home. Money was hidden in envelopes, behind bricks, under floorboards, and even inside clothing. Over time, rumors began to spread. Locals, musicians, and backstage workers whispered that Stringbean kept thousands of dollars in his cabin. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumors took on a life of their own. Combined with the couple's predictable routine, these whispers slowly painted a target on their backs, one they never saw coming. Every Saturday night followed the same pattern. Stringbean and Estelle drove to Nashville for the Grand Ole Opry. He performed 2 shows while she waited backstage. Afterward, they returned home late at night along dark, quiet roads. They had followed this routine for years without incident, and familiarity bred comfort. What they did not realize was that someone else was watching. Someone who knew their schedule, believed the rumors, and saw opportunity where others saw trust. By November 1973, that dangerous combination, predictability, isolation, and whispered wealth, had aligned perfectly. On the night of November 10th, everything began as it always had. Stringbean performed with warmth and humor. Estelle smiled quietly, helping as she always did. No one who said goodbye that night imagined it would be the last time. While they were on stage, 2 young men, cousins John Brown and Marvin Douglas Brown, broke into the cabin on Baker Road. They searched desperately for cash, fueled by alcohol, drugs, and impatience. When they found less than expected, they made a deadly choice. Instead of leaving, they decided to wait. They turned the radio to WSM, listening for the end of the Opry broadcast, tracking the exact moment the couple would begin their drive home. In that dark cabin, surrounded by overturned drawers, the crime crossed a point of no return. Around midnight, Stringbean and Estelle arrived home. Stringbean stepped onto the porch first, sensing something was wrong the moment he opened the door. He carried a small .22 pistol, a precaution born of instinct, not fear. When movement startled him inside the cabin, he fired a shot. The intruders responded with heavier weapons. Stringbean was struck and killed near the fireplace almost instantly. Estelle fled into the yard, screaming for help that could not reach her. One of the cousins chased her. Near the car, she fell, begged for mercy, and was shot. By morning, the cabin stood silent. The front door open, the couple lying where they had fallen. They were discovered the next day by Grandpa Jones, Stringbean's close friend, who had arrived for a planned hunting trip. The shock of the scene stayed with him for the rest of his life. Investigators quickly arrived and began piecing together what had happened. The cabin showed signs of a frantic search. Guns were missing. A chainsaw was gone. Yet checks lay untouched, and large sums of cash remained hidden in places the killers never thought to look. The irony was cruel. The very money that fueled the crime was still there. The investigation moved quickly once witnesses came forward. Marvin Douglas Brown's habit of bragging led police directly to the stolen weapons, including a shotgun once gifted to Stringbean by Grandpa Jones. Both cousins were arrested, each blaming the other, while admitting their presence at the scene. Under Tennessee's felony murder law, both were charged with first-degree murder. The trial in late 1974 drew musicians, fans, and grieving friends. Grandpa Jones testified, reliving the worst day of his life. The jury reached a clear verdict. Both men were convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive 99-year terms, effectively life in prison. For many, it felt like the only possible outcome. But time has a way of reopening wounds. Marvin Brown died in prison in 2003 without apology. John Brown remained incarcerated for decades, repeatedly denied parole. Then, in 2014, after more than 40 years, he was released. The decision stunned Nashville. Friends, Fans and members of the Opry community spoke out, believing justice had been undone. For them, the pain was not history. It was still alive. In the mid-1990s, a new owner of the long-abandoned cabin made a startling discovery. Behind a loose brick in the fireplace, wrapped in decayed paper, was nearly $20,000 in cash. The rumors had been true all along. The money that inspired the crime had remained hidden for decades, untouched and useless. The discovery brought renewed attention to the tragedy and underscored its cruel irony. 2 lives had been taken for wealth that was never found. The money, once a symbol of security, became a symbol of loss for the community. It reopened memories that had never fully healed. It reminded everyone that the danger had not been money itself, but the fear of losing it, and the belief that it was worth killing for. The murders of Stringbean and Estelle changed country music culture forever. Artists who once lived openly began installing alarms and moving away from isolation. Trust faded. An era ended. Yet Stringbean's legacy endured. His banjo style continues to influence musicians. Reruns of Hee Haw still bring laughter. Fans visit his grave, leaving flowers, pics, and handwritten notes. Estelle, once known only as his wife, is now remembered as a steady presence whose life mattered deeply. Their story became a lesson written in loss, a reminder that kindness can be mistaken for weakness, and simplicity can attract danger in a world shaped by greed. In the end, the mystery of Stringbean's death was not solved by hidden conspiracies or dramatic twists, but by understanding human behavior. Fear, routine, rumor, and desperation came together with tragic precision. The killers gained almost nothing. The community lost far too much. What remains is not comfort, but truth. And sometimes, truth is enough to remind us what really matters. Life, trust, and the cost of taking either for granted. One of the most important lessons hidden inside Stringbean's story is how fear can survive long after the danger that created it is gone. The Great Depression ended decades before his death, yet its grip never loosened on his mind. For Stringbean, money was not about luxury or status. It was about safety. He had watched banks fail, families lose everything overnight, and promises collapse without warning. Those experiences rewired his sense of security. Even when he became successful, even when television and the Grand Ole Opry made him a household name, he never truly believed the good times would last. To him, cash in hand felt real, while savings accounts felt like illusions that could disappear at any moment. This fear was not unusual for people of his generation, especially those who lived through extreme hardship. Many carried the same habits quietly, mistrusting institutions and relying on what they could physically see and touch. But in Stringbean's case, those habits became public rumors. People talked, they exaggerated, they speculated, and those whispers traveled far beyond friendly conversation. What began as a private coping mechanism slowly turned into a deadly myth. The tragedy is that the money Stringbean guarded so carefully was never what truly protected him. His real safety came from community, trust, and kindness, things that could not be hidden behind bricks or floorboards. In the end, the fear meant to keep him safe became one of the factors that exposed him to danger. For many years after the murders, much of the focus remained on Stringbean alone. His fame, his music, and his legacy dominated the conversation, while Estelle's story often remained in the background. Yet her life and death deserve equal recognition. Estelle was not simply a supporting figure. She was a partner, a caretaker, and a steady presence who helped make Stringbean's life possible. She managed routines, provided emotional grounding, and shared the same values of simplicity and caution. Like her husband, she carried Depression-era instincts that shaped how she lived and trusted the world. On the night of the murders, her actions showed courage and humanity. She ran, she called for help, and in her final moments, she begged for mercy. Her death was not just collateral damage. It was a deliberate act of cruelty that revealed the true nature of the crime. Over time, fans began to speak her name more often. Letters left at the gravesite addressed both of them. Stories remembered her quiet smile backstage and her devotion to her husband. Slowly, the narrative shifted. Estelle was no longer just Stringbean's wife. She became recognized as a life lost unjustly, a woman whose kindness did not shield her from violence. Remembering her fully is part of honoring the truth of what happened, and part of restoring dignity to a story that for too long focused only on fame. Decades have passed since the murders on Baker Road, yet the story of Stringbean and Estelle continues to resonate because it speaks to issues that still exist today. Rumors still spread faster than truth. Predictable routines still create vulnerabilities. And desperation still drives people to believe that someone else's life holds the answer to their problems. This story reminds us that violence often begins long before crime itself, growing quietly in assumptions, whispers, and unchecked beliefs. It also challenges the idea that wealth brings safety. Stringbean did not live extravagantly, yet the perception of wealth was enough to make him a target. In today's world, where personal information spreads easily and privacy is harder to protect, the lessons feel even more relevant. The murders forced the country music community to rethink trust and security, but they also left a deeper message for anyone willing to listen. Safety is not found in hiding nor in isolation. It is found in awareness, community, and balance. Stringbean's legacy survives not because of the way he died, but because of the way he lived, honestly, humbly, and with heart. The tragedy serves as a reminder that the simplest lives are not always the safest, and that fear, when left unexamined, can quietly shape outcomes we never intend. Before the deaths of Stringbean and Estelle, the country music world operated on trust that now feels almost impossible to imagine. Performers lived close to fans, welcomed strangers easily, and often treated success as something shared rather than guarded. Homes were open, routines were public, and the idea of personal danger rarely crossed anyone's mind. The murders shattered that illusion overnight. What happened on Baker Road forced musicians to confront a reality they had never prepared for. If someone as kind, humble, and unassuming as Stringbean could be targeted, then no one was truly immune. In the years that followed, artists quietly changed how they lived. Security systems were installed. Fences went up. Locations became private. Backstage access tightened. The warmth that once defined the community did not disappear, but became cautious. Many performers later admitted that they never again felt completely safe in the way they had before November 1973. The crime marked the end of a more innocent era in Nashville, one where fame felt small and community felt large. It also changed how artists talked to one another. Conversations about money, privacy, and safety became common, often spoken in hushed tones. Stringbean's death became a reference point, a reminder shared among musicians as both warning and lesson. His story was no longer just personal tragedy. It became a cultural turning point. The cost of that change was enormous, measured not in locks or alarms, but in lost trust. While the industry continued to grow and evolve, something gentle and open-hearted was left behind. That loss, though invisible, remains one of the most lasting impacts of the crime. At the heart of the tragedy lies a harsh truth about human behavior. Desperation often blinds people to reality. John and Marvin Brown were not chasing a guaranteed fortune. They were chasing a story they had heard repeated often enough to believe. Rumors of hidden money grew larger each time they were retold, until imagination replaced fact. In their minds, the cabin on Baker Road became a symbol of escape, a place where all their problems could be solved in one night. What they failed to understand was that even if the money had been easily found, it would never have delivered what they believed it would. Easy wealth rarely fixes deep problems. Instead, it exposes them. The Browns' actions were driven by impatience, substance abuse, and a belief that someone else's life owed them something. This mindset is not unique to their story. History is filled with crimes fueled by the idea that another person's success is the answer to one's own failures. In reality, the cost is always far higher than imagined. The Browns gained a few stolen items and a lifetime of consequences. Two innocent people lost everything. The money, the object of their obsession, remained hidden and useless. The illusion of easy wealth proved deadly not because it was real, but because it was believed. This is one of the most painful lessons of the story. Greed does not need truth to thrive. It only needs belief. And when belief goes unchecked, it can destroy lives far beyond those who act on it. It is easy for stories like this to become defined by their endings, but doing so would be a disservice to who Stringbean truly was. Long before Baker Road became a crime scene, it was simply home to a man who brought joy to millions. Stringbean's banjo style, rooted in old climber traditions, helped preserve a sound that might otherwise have faded with time. His humor was never cruel or cutting. It was gentle, self-aware, and welcoming. Audiences laughed with him, not at him. That warmth is what made his presence so powerful. Even today, musicians credit him as an influence, not just musically, but personally. He showed that success did not require arrogance, and that simplicity could exist alongside fame. Estelle shared that legacy. Together, they lived in a way that resisted excess, valuing routine, loyalty, and humility. Remembering them only through the lens of violence risks overshadowing decades of goodness. Their lives mattered long before their deaths, and their impact continues long after. The true legacy of Stringbean is not the fear that ended his life, but the kindness that defined it. His story endures not because of mystery alone, but because it reminds us of what is worth protecting. In telling it fully, with honesty and care, we ensure that he and Estelle are remembered not as victims of rumor and greed, but as people who live with sincerity in a world that did not always return aid. As time moves forward, the story of Stringbean and Estelle continues to stand as more than a historical tragedy tied to country music. It has become a broader lesson about how ordinary lives can be affected by forces they never see coming. At its core, this story is not only about crime, money, or fame, but about human behavior and the quiet risks that grow unnoticed over time. Stringbean and Estelle did not live recklessly. They did not seek danger. They lived in a way that felt safe because it had always been safe before. Their routines were familiar, their surroundings trusted, and their beliefs shaped by past hardships rather than present threats. Yet the world around them had changed. Even if they had not, rumors spread more easily. Desperation had grown deeper. People struggling with addiction and instability began looking for shortcuts instead of solutions. What makes this story so unsettling is how small the warning signs were. There were no threats, no break-ins before that night, no obvious danger signals. Everything felt normal until it wasn't. This is why the story still resonates today. Many people live with similar assumptions, believing that kindness will always be met with kindness, or that long-standing habits are automatically safe simply because they have never caused harm before. Stringbean's story reminds us that safety is not only about intention, but awareness. It asks difficult questions about how much of our lives we expose without realizing it, how easily private habits can become public knowledge, and how trust can sometimes be mistaken for protection. It also challenges us to think about how society treats success and wealth, even perceived wealth. The belief that someone else has enough can quietly turn into justification for harm in the wrong hands. Perhaps the most painful truth of all is that the tragedy did not need to happen to be meaningful. The lives of Stringbean and Estelle already had value far beyond money or rumors. Their deaths did not reveal who they were. Their lives did. Yet it took violence for many people to recognize the dangers of gossip, predictability, and unchecked desperation. Today, as their story continues to be told, it serves as both remembrance and warning. It reminds us to honor the people behind the headlines, to question the stories we repeat, and to recognize that the simplest lives are often built on deep resilience, not weakness. In remembering Stringbean and Estelle fully, even though the facts of Stringbean and Estelle murders are now well known, the truth remains uncomfortable for many people to accept. That discomfort comes from how ordinary the causes of the tragedy really were. There was no elaborate plan, no criminal mastermind, and no deep conspiracy hidden behind the crime. Instead, it was built from very human weaknesses. Fear, greed, rumor, and a belief that someone else's life held an easy solution to personal problems. This makes the story harder to distance ourselves from. It is easier to dismiss tragedy when it feels rare or extreme, but Stringbean's story does not allow that comfort. It forces us to acknowledge that danger can grow quietly inside everyday situations. The killers did not target him because he was famous, powerful, or protected. They targeted him because they believed he was vulnerable. His kindness, his routine, and his desire for privacy were interpreted as weakness rather than humanity. That is what makes the truth so unsettling. It suggests that goodness alone is not always enough to keep people safe. Another uncomfortable aspect of the story is how long the rumors circulated before the crime happened. Many people had heard that Stringbean kept money at home. Some repeated it casually, without malice. Others treated it as harmless gossip. Yet every retelling strengthened the belief that the cabin held something worth stealing. This shows how words can have consequences far beyond intention. Few people ever imagine that repeating a story can help lead to violence. But in this case, it did. The truth also challenges romantic ideas.